Hi there, BookTube. It's Roz, and it's late December, and this is a time of year when we're meant to be doing our best of the year sort of videos. But I find it really, really hard to do that until it's literally the end of the year, and when I know that the last thing I read in the year is not going to be, the best thing I've read all year. So instead, I'm going to do. I'm doing a little quick review of one of the last books that I will read this year, which is The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley. And I don't think it's going to be literally one of my top books of the year, but it's a very good one, and one that I really did want to enthuse about for you, because it is, when I read sort of really recent fiction, I always try and review it if I can, so that you can think, oh, is this one that I'd like to pick up? And it may well be, if you're the right reader for it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's not exactly the sort of thing I would normally read, and it actually came out in the summer of 2024, and I didn't pick it up at the time, although I heard people speak of it positively, because it's got a bit more of a genre feel perhaps than I tend to choose. But I was wrong. This absolutely turned out to be a real Roz book. I quite like at this time of year to kind of push myself to dip into some of the genres of fiction that I tend to avoid. And this was a multiple score on that front, because it's kind of a science fiction book. It has a sort of time travel plot. It's historical fiction. Well, I read a lot of that, but in a interesting way combined with the time travel. It's sort of romantic fiction, really strong kind of romance plot with the classic, will they, won't they, do they really like each other? Are they, all those tropes, but done in a interesting way. It's quite a funny book, but it's also has a serious side, and sort of some ideas that the author wants to bring, and some sort of genuine emotion. What ideas does she want to bring? This is, being a time travel book, lends itself, as science fiction often does, to sort of commenting, I suppose, on present day society. So things like, what's happening around the climate emergency, but also in particular, some ideas around migration and assimilation and imperialism, and the legacy of imperialism, and sort of racism, and how that's sort of tied together. Conscious and unconscious bias, all of that is there in the book, but not in a heavy-handed way. It's interesting that Kaliane Bradley, the author, this is her first novel, and the main character in the book has a sort of slightly sort of personal or autobiographical element, in that Kaliane Bradley's mother came to the UK from Cambodia at the time of the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot, killing fields, Year Zero, all that horrendous trauma. And that's the Bradley's mother's experience, and likewise the unnamed main character of the book. And then her mother, both the character and Kaliane's, marries an Englishman, but the sort of inherited trauma, the being brought up by a first generation immigrant, who's come as a refugee, even if they don't maybe describe themselves as that or think of themselves as that. All that is really relevant to the story, and obviously draws on Bradley's personal experience. But how did she come to write this particular book? Well, during the COVID lockdown, she developed an interest in the Franklin expedition. That was in the 1840s, and it was a naval expedition to try and find the Northwest Passage, a route through the Arctic Sea from the Atlantic to the Pacific. There was a number of people that attempted to do that, and the Franklin expedition was a disaster. They became stuck in pack ice. There was 2 exceptionally cold summers where the pack ice never released the ship. So, and ultimately, they go on a long march to try and get away, and they all die, and possibly, end up with cannibalism, real sort of extreme bit of history. She became really intrigued by that, and intrigued in particular by one of the members of the expedition, this chap, Captain Graham Gore. Handsome fellow, she obviously thought, and she wanted to write something about him, and she started sort of sharing some bits of writing with her friends, almost like she describes it almost like a sort of literary parlour game that she was playing during lockdown. But as she did that, she realised, and her friends that she was sharing these little tidbits with, sort of said, I think you're growing a book here, Kaliane, and she was, and she did. So this was the result. So Graham Gore, who she's in real life a bit obsessed with, the pretext of the story is that he is brought from the disastrous expedition to a sort of near future 21st century, along with 4 other people who are sort of captured from their own time at a point when they were about to die, so it won't mess up the timeline, and they're brought almost like refugees or migrants to this country, and the ministry, which our narrator works, allocates each of them a bridge, a person who will be their sort of mentor and minder and support them. And so we get to know all these characters and their bridges, but we're really focused on the narrator and Graham Gore. And they have to live together because they're helping them in theory to sort of adjust and assimilate. And then we get the sort of the will they, won't they romance and so on element. We also get little chunks of historical fiction where we go back to the Franklin expedition and sort of see what happens to them. So we go back and forth between those 2. But the historical fiction bits are kind of like little excerpts, and then the majority of the plot and the story happens in the this near future present day. Yeah. I think that time travel novels are really hard to pull off. Okay, it's very easy for them to seem ridiculous or to sort of pull holes in them and so on. Cleverly, Bradley kind of finds a way quite early in the book to sort of say, don't worry about that stuff too much, don't think about it too hard. And, I thought, okay, I'll just go with the ride. And I did. And I was glad that I did because, if you start overthinking it, you spoil it for yourself. Whereas instead, I romped through reading this book with great pleasure. I loved Gore as a character. You could see how she sort of her obsession with him. She turns him into this wonderfully kind of charismatic central figure that has a sort of an element of mystery. He's very charming and affable, but there's something steely underneath, you come to realise. Some of the other characters, time-travelling characters, superb, especially Maggie, who was taken from 1665. She was going to probably die of the plague or something. And she's this really sort of feisty, feminist, lesbian woman who, from the 17th century, who finds being in the 21st century a real sort of relief and release. Unlike, say, the one who was the bloke who was snatched up from a battle in the English Civil War, who's hates the way society works in the present day, and finds it hard to adjust. Although he finds a way through, but yeah. I mustn't do any plot spoilers. And then this lovely Arthur, dear darling Arthur, who was scooped out of the trenches, from the Battle of the Somme, just before he was going to die, and is so sweet and gentle, and you sort of classic kind of war poet type. And Yes, the characters are very engaging, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. I like the historical fiction sections. Overall, I would say it's probably a little bit longer than it needs to be. It's a first book, so I'm not going to be too critical of that. I thought the beginning, the setup, the establishing of the characters and so on was superb. I probably got a bit sort of bogged down in the middle part of the sort of romance and so on, but then it picked up again, and a really rompingly exciting and enjoyable sort of last third, sort of running to the sort of dramatic finish, and a nice twist, and then a sort of little sort of epilogue-y afterthought. So a really nice sort of story arc to get your teeth into. So definitely a fun read, and one well written, and one I'd say, I hope, having heard my description, you'll know whether this might be a book for you.